Hey everyone, it's Matt from LimaCharlie. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am looking forward to be sharing with you one of our newest features here in the platform. This is something that we've just recently debuted over the past couple of weeks, known as Bi-directionality. And of course, if you're here, then you already know we got something new. We've always got brand new things coming out in the platform. And today we're going to be covering what this particular extension is, what it does, how you can use it, how you can start to employ it, and really some of the benefits that it's going to offer for an organization as well. Now, before I jump into that, for anyone who might be seeing me or hearing about LimaCharlie for the very first time, I'm going to take just a moment and talk to you a little bit about what is LimaCharlie, the SecOps cloud platform. So if you're seeing me and hearing this for the very first time, and you're kind of like, what is this guy talking about? What's going on here? Well, LimaCharlie is designed to be very much like a cloud platform provider. These days, if I'm going to go build something, I'm not going to go and source hardware and find a physical colo and pay someone to manage my physical server or anything like that. I'm going to go to a cloud provider and I'm going to get the little bits and pieces that I need. A little bit of database, a little bit of DNS, a little bit of VMs, a little bit of storage, whatever the needs might be. We want to take an exact primitive-based approach towards security. LimaCharlie allows you to build the exact program that you need using and paying for only what you need and only what you use. We think it's a little bit of a big differentiator and a ground shift from kind of the typical, let me try and fit all security programs into a certain box. What that does is it also allows us to have a very extensible platform, and we can utilize our position to expand and build all sorts of new features, bi-directionality being the most recent one. Now, bi-directionality, for anyone who's curious, speaks directly towards our telemetry. I'm going to talk about this as an example in just a moment, but it speaks about the ability of a platform to be able to reach back and forth to different telemetry sources in order to create different commands, to create something new, to action off of telemetry that may have come in. And you might be saying to yourself, well, wait a second, Matt, isn't that really just like what my SOAR platform does? And I would argue in some cases, yes, that is exactly what SOAR platforms are designed to do. They're meant to be that kind of next stage, if you will. Here's all of my telemetry coming in. I'm going to forward that over to a SOAR platform. And based on what ends up in the SOAR platform, I want to take certain actions back against those telemetry sources. One of the issues with this that we found is that enterprises get very, very stretched thin once you start to introduce more tools, more concepts. So what our bi-directionality feature does, it doesn't necessarily replace a SOAR platform, but it does bring some of that functionality directly into LimaCharlie and allow you to manage it from an automated perspective. So with that said, I'm going to hop into a few use cases and we'll walk through what that looks like. I am now going to take a look at some of the differences in telemetry. So really quick, there's two types of telemetry in most any security setup in the world: bidirectional and unidirectional. Bidirectional telemetry within LimaCharlie has always been our EDR sensor. What we mean by bidirectionality is that sensor not only sends telemetry, but I can also interact back with that telemetry source using various commands. We can utilize scripts. Within LimaCharlie, we can task a sensor to do a thing. We can deploy additional software. It is a fully featured EDR sensor that I can go backwards and forwards with. Where this becomes really useful, as I'm sure you can probably imagine, and for those of you who know, when I'm doing a thing like an investigation, triaging, responding to an incident or something like that, bidirectionality is my ability to go and collect additional files or request additional information. Without this type of feature set, a lot of times, and this is what security used to be for a while, is I used to have to say, okay, these are the systems I'm interested in. Let me write some scripts or deploy things or find a way to interact with these systems outside of the EDR sensor, which of course, from a forensic and evidentiary perspective, can stomp on evidence. It can overwrite artifacts that might be interesting to me. But it also does things outside of a secure channel that an EDR sensor will typically set up. Bidirectionality has been kind of a cornerstone of EDR capabilities for a long time because it's not enough to just have my agent, have my system sending alerts in or sending telemetry in. I need to be able to interact with it in order to actually get to the effective steps of incident response, containment, triage, remediation, so on and so forth. In security, there's also been a long-standing position of unidirectional telemetry. That's over to my right-hand side here. Unidirectional telemetry from a LimaCharlie perspective has started with our adapter. Long story short, an adapter is a version of our sensor that is essentially a log forwarder. It allows you to deploy either a binary or a cloud connector that links LimaCharlie with another ingestion source. So if I wanted to bring in things like AWS logs or Google Cloud logs, things from third-party applications, Okta, 1Password, if I wanted to bring in additional EDRs, we've also got the ability to integrate with things like CrowdStrike and Windows Defender and SentinelOne, because we know our customers want to integrate with those sources as well. Everything's been treated as a unidirectional source up until, of course, our release of this new feature. Unidirectional is very straightforward. Telemetry is being received in to one place. Now, this has been a cornerstone of security, of SIEM monitoring for a very long time. Forward all your logs into some sort of a kitchen sink approach and just deal with everything when it gets there. What this has done is it's centered a lot of security into those single pane of glass or dashboard focused approaches where I'm inside of a single screen and I'm manipulating data, running queries, looking through my logs, writing detections against these unidirectional sources. And a lot of times what that means is my security processes have been built around those sources being unidirectional. So a typical SOC workflow might be bring in the Windows event logs, run detections against those Windows event logs. And if a certain thing happens, either kick it over to a SOAR platform and let the SOAR platform reach back to the sensor, reach back through EDR, or in a lot of cases, go manual. This is not really too beneficial because if I'm able to detect at wire speed, but I'm able to respond at human speed, I'm not really gaining an efficiency of time. And unfortunately, those of you who may have heard me say this before, if I'm not gaining the efficiency of time, then the adversary is. We don't really want that to be the case. We want to find a way to make both the detection and the response portion of things as fast as we possibly can. But that being said, this has been kind of the approach for security teams for a very long time. Ingest all of the things, look through all of the data in a single platform, do your best to hopefully try and be as fast as you can with some sort of a remediation step, and hopefully we catch the adversaries before things get too bad. That works sometimes. What we're trying to do and what we've changed here from a bi-directional perspective is we are looking to take any telemetry source that's out there, any telemetry source, not just the ones that we've got connectors for, but anything that we can build out backwards and forwards connectivity for and making it bi-directional, making it so that I can reach back to any telemetry source and issue commands, interact with that particular source. Now, let's be clear. When I say reach back to a telemetry source, I don't want to manipulate telemetry. Well, I don't want to change the data necessarily, but what I want to do is I want to be able to reach back and say, I want to issue a command based on activity that's already happened. I've got a few different examples here that I'll happily walk through, and we'll get to those case studies in just a moment. But I want to just pause on this idea. Think about that unidirectional security approach of where we just ingest all the data into a place and we just do a thing. Folks, as I've kind of said a few times now, it doesn't really work out that well. The big issue there is human response time. If I can respond at machine speed, then I can get a much better advantage against that suspicious or malicious activity. That's what our bidirectionality capability does. It opens up the door for you to interact back with any platform that's out there. Let's walk through a few use cases and I'll show you exactly kind of how this works. So the first case study I've got is actually going to utilize an Office 365 tenant. I'm not going to start with LimaCharlie EDR connecting to LimaCharlie. We already know about that feature set and functionality. Now, I guess before I go too far, I'll simply say that there's a lot of table stakes that I'm assuming everyone here knows about LimaCharlie as well. So before we go too far, the biggest thing that everyone needs to be aware of in LimaCharlie is the detection and response capability that you'll find inside of the platform available to any user that's out there. Our detection and response capability decouples the detection and response options. Now, let me clarify what I mean, because you might be like, wait, Matt, they're here in the same screen. What this does is it allows you to create and write your own detections and then create and write your own responses according to the parameters that you specify. What I mean by that is there is no single checkbox, which is if detected, quarantine, yes or no, and those are all the options I've got. I can get as granular and as specific as I want to in this particular detection and response capability. I can write rules that look for certain processes and look for certain types of capabilities and then act accordingly based on maybe alert severity, system type, external facing, internal facing. Where did the connection happen? Was it to a public address? Was it to a private address? All of these different decision factors should come in to when you're writing detection and response rules. We take this for granted here at LimaCharlie. So it's really easy when I talk about our bi-directional sensors, and I'll hop into our Windows one really quick. It's really easy to take advantage of all the different features and capabilities that are here. I can reach back to those sensors. I can issue commands. I can run additional data points. But the biggest and most important feature is, of course, going to be my timeline. This is seeing all my data stream in. For us here at LimaCharlie, folks, those are table stakes. Now, let me hop back over to the example, and we'll talk about where O365 features in, because up until, I guess, this webinar, this has been a single directional or unidirectional source for us, meaning I can send O365 telemetry into LimaCharlie. Now, the biggest, most important part about this here is going to be this connection right here, where I'm sending telemetry from O365 into LimaCharlie. That's done via an adapter. Now, in this case, because it is a cloud-based app, that would be a cloud-to-cloud connector, meaning I would tell the LimaCharlie cloud, I want you to reach out to Office 365 and bring that data back over. Well, unfortunately, what LimaCharlie allowed me to do up until now is I could ingest that O365 telemetry, number one, and I could write a detection and response rule against that telemetry too. So I've written, it's really shorthand, but I've written a really shorthand detection and response rule here, which is I want you to observe my O365 telemetry, and I want you to identify a suspicious login from a non-approved geolocation. Well, if I have an email account that gets logged in from a non-approved geolocation, and let me be clear, non-approved, suspicious, and malicious are not the same thing. But let's just say I was very rigid about where my users were allowed to log in or allowed to access their information from. It's a thing. Some organizations run into it. But let's just say that was the case and this detection and response rule tripped. Up until this webinar, this is about as far as our workflow would go from a LimaCharlie perspective. Now, that's not to say that the tool was insufficient. You can write your own detection and response rules against LimaCharlie. So I could go as granular as I want in this particular rule. And I could say, not only do I have specific rules that I care about or specific geolocations I care about, I also want to rate severities against them. And what I mean by that is I might want to say, is it a managed inbox or not? Is it a mailing list or not? Is it an account that even should be logged in? Is it an account that even should have an email address? I can go as far in this particular rule here as I want in order to build out more context. And we could certainly do that. So if I wanted to add in a little more context here, I could also say non-mailing list account or something. What I'm trying to highlight is that I can get as specific and granular as I want in the detection and response rules to cut down the amount of noise that my SOC and my security team have to deal with. That's table stakes for us. But no matter how granular I made that detection and response rule, all I'm doing is whittling down the number of detections that my team has to respond to. I'm not giving them more capabilities. Maybe I'm freeing up more time. We'll say that's a good thing to have. Bi-directionality is going to change things a little bit. So bi-directionality is going to take that exact same rule. We're going to take the detection part of that rule and keep it the same. Now, I wrote a little bit extra in the previous one, but let's just stick with our original case study of a suspicious login from a non-approved geolocation. And before, again, that was just a detection. It was just simply to say, hey, here's this thing that you need to go look at, and then go look at it. We're now going to add in that bi-directionality capability. And let me show you what that looks like. So I've, again, shorthanded this particular type of response action now. But what I can do with that detection and response rule is I can actually then say in my response, not only do I want you to detect and let me know that this thing has happened, I also want you to reach out to the Office 365 CLI, lock that account. And then for anyone who's curious, and we won't get too much down this road, but this particular syntax right here are templates, template strings, and transforms, which you can use inside of LimaCharlie detection and response rules that allow you to pull from the detection and send some of that data in the response. And what that's going to do is allow me to say a rule or a detection rule fired for a particular instance of a thing against a particular account in a particular tenant, however many details you want to add in there. I want to pull certain data points so I can issue corrective, remediative actions according to such. There's a perfect example. If I see a suspicious login from a non-approved geolocation, I want to immediately reach back out and lock that account. All done with inside LimaCharlie. All done with inside a detection and response rule. We'll look at some examples a little bit later of actual detection and response rules that do this. But right then and there, I've taken away that additional step or that need for an additional platform. Notice I've removed the human speed of the response action, which means if this detection fires and my top SOC analyst is unfortunately just, grabbing coffee at that moment, they're not wasting those minutes. I can programmatically reach back out to platforms and have them do the corrective action for me. Now, the nice thing about this is I went very general in my detection and response rule. And if I kind of come over and hover right above my detection and response rule here, you'll see I went very generic with this. Suspicious login from non-approved geolocation, lock the account, and I pulled the username from the event in order to lock it down. Folks, we could go even more granular with the response action if we want to. Meaning I could say, if the account is a C-suite account, immediately lock it and then issue a call or start a call tree for a response action. If the account is and I'm going to say least privileged account, like an email account should be, if it's a least privileged account or if it's a mailing list or something that shouldn't even have a login associated with it, which means I might be looking at a false positive or I'm looking at a misconfiguration, I might want to notify the email admins. So not just a security alert, this might also be a really good infrastructure tip for us as well. Now, do I want to go the route of emailing that particular individual to let them know what has happened? Well, if I'm going to lock their account, it's not a guarantee that they're going to get it. But let's just say I had a secondary or tertiary access or communication mechanism in place, and I wanted to not only send the lock command out, but I also wanted to notify the individual and say, hey, we've locked your account due to some suspicious activity. Please call, the help desk or whatever it is. I can do that as well. And I can do it all from right within the response action. Let me revisit that one more time. I can have one detection and response rule. The detection part doesn't change. The who it happens to can change, and I can manage all of that within one particular rule. That allows for a lot of really good variability between the two, and it allows for me to create a really kind of custom approach towards the way that I secure a particular environment. All right, let's go take a look at another case study because I've got a few here for us. And I'm going to use my handy dandy kind of whiteboard that I've got up hand here to zoom into another one. All right, perfect. So in this case, we're going to take a look at case study number 2. This is one where I have an EDR sensor sending in telemetry to LimaCharlie. I've got a detection and response rule that looks for a really easy process sequence of Microsoft Word spawning PowerShell. I got confused for a moment because it's winword.exe opening a docx that then spawns PowerShell. And I know PowerShell should be capital P, capital S. Tell you what, let's fix that right now before anybody, including myself, has to stare at it too much longer. All right, there we go. Now, on the surface, this is likely going to be a cause for concern. Admittedly, I've seen some organizations in my life where they do run PowerShell scripts directly out of Microsoft Word files. However, 9 times out of 10, 9.99999 times out of 10, this is a phish or a malicious attachment or something like that. It's very rare that you see this to the point that your security team doesn't know about it. Let me put it that way, if it is in fact legitimate. This is a really simple rule. Now, there's a couple ways to approach going through this one. The first thing that you might do is you might say to yourself, well, Matt, that's pretty straightforward. If I see a docx spawning PowerShell, just go immediately kill that process tree. No questions asked. Immediately go kill that process tree so that way that thing does not run or does not execute any further. And I'm going to tell you right now, I would do the exact same thing. I would write part of my detection and response rule that looks and says, I don't even care what this thing's doing, kill the process tree. However, there's an additional security question that we have to ask when something like this happens, such as, wait a second, docx's that contain commands to spawn PowerShell don't just pop out of thin air. Where did this thing come from? Where did this particular file come from? How did it land on this system? Now, I want you to think a little bit about a typical adversary lifecycle or a typical attack chain. Where you detect activity might be the end, the middle, or the beginning of that particular attack chain, that particular exploitation, that particular process execution. Easiest example I can give everyone is if you are detecting the ransom note that gets left behind, the ransomware has already occurred. If you are detecting a malicious email arriving at your email gateway, you're towards the beginning of an attack lifecycle. Now, in this case, we have a docx spawning PowerShell. This isn't the beginning, but it's close to the beginning. We're hoping that this is pre-massive exploitation and lateral movement and credential harvesting and escalation of privileges and things like that. We're hoping in this case that we're just seeing the email fish being clicked or opened. But that's our clue right there. Where did this thing come from? So I might want to actually go and take a look at my case study. And I might want to go a step further. And here I want to use LimaCharlie to actually communicate to two platforms simultaneously. Because now I have to answer two questions. Where did this thing come from? Number one. And number two, I need to take a corrective action. So I changed my template around a little bit here. This is actually not, and I know I'm making a quick change here, this might actually not be a LimaCharlie EDR sensor. This might be a defender sensor or agent, I should call it. And I know we're going to make this circle a little bit bigger so that way the words all go in one line. This might be a Windows Defender agent, or I should say just an endpoint with Defender installed, sending telemetry into LimaCharlie. Well, if I see that same particular detection where I've got a docx spawning PowerShell, I don't want to just kill the process tree. I don't want to just stop that from running. I also want to know, where did this thing come from? So one of the things I can do within our response actions is I can reach out to multiple platforms simultaneously. Now you might notice in this case, not only am I reaching back to Windows Defender is the example I'm using here, but any EDR that I could quickly quarantine a system or quarantine a file or kill a process tree or whatever sort of corrective action I've got, I'm going to execute that one in that case. So I do have that loop back with my original telemetry source. However, I'm also leaning on our good friends at Sublime Security who do email security here. And I might also say, hey, I've got email security in place. This looks like a phishing attachment. Grab the hash from that particular file, the docx, spin it up against my email security platform to see, has this thing been identified anywhere? Now, before we go too far, some of you might say, well, how did it get through the email security platform? That is not really what we're here to discuss. I'll just say sometimes emails do get through. Sometimes it's different attachments, and sometimes it might be in a different form. Someone might read this and be like, well, Matt, there's an issue here because maybe the docx came from a zip file, maybe blah, blah, blah. You're totally right. There's 1,000,001 technical combinations of how this thing could have happened. I don't want to focus too much on the exploit path. Instead, I want to focus on I can start to answer these concerning questions programmatically. I want to start to answer these questions quickly. I want to be able to ask these types of things. Where did it come from? Can I quarantine the system? Can I kill the process tree? If the answer is yes to all of those, script it, automate it, put it in a response rule, and let the machines do what they're supposed to do. Now, in this case study, we took our bi-directional capabilities and we actually expanded them out a little bit. Not only, again, as I said, did we loop back to our original EDR source, but we also reached out to another platform. This is kind of like a branching in this case. I'm able to utilize LimaCharlie's capabilities to say, I actually want to take the parameters from a detection on one source and feed them to another destination or another platform, here and linking these two things together. And of course, that's going to bring us to our third case study, which does exactly that. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit here. And we're using Defender again. I'm just using Defender as a placeholder for anyone who's curious here. This isn't a lean or a shift towards Defender. This is, I think I actually went over too far. We're going to go back to what should be our beginning. I've got my kind of whiteboard set up here, and it's really just one big giant board. There we go. All right, so let's just hang out here. And in this case, I've once again picked on Defender as a potential for an additive solution. A lot of LimaCharlie customers will actually utilize LimaCharlie EDR for some of that additional support, and Defender as kind of their I don't want to say backup, but it will be like a secondary running agent. We have quite a few customers who run this setup. But in this case right here, I'm in the exact same parameters I was before. I am sending telemetry into something like LimaCharlie. It's coming from Defender. I receive from Defender a high fidelity alert. So in this case, the telemetry that I'm receiving is already an alert. This is an interesting use case, and a lot of folks need to understand when you're sending telemetry into a platform, you need to understand that in this case, I'm not sending telemetry, I'm sending alerts over. They come with some inherent telemetry inside of them. That's an important distinction because it means I'm a little more trusting of the rules. I might not be writing a rule. I'm not saying there's no false positives, but I might not be writing the rule to build or form the fidelity. I'm ingesting a source that already utilizes fidelity. And again, I'm just using Defender as a name holder here. Whether or not it has quarantine actions and capabilities was not the thing I was focused on. I'm focused more on the capability of being able to bring in another EDR platform and then issue commands against that platform. Again, allowing LimaCharlie to be not only a provider for LimaCharlie EDR, but also any EDR platform you want to bring in. As long as it itself has bi-directional capabilities, which means a CLI or an API I can reach back out to, I'm going to be able to manage that platform from within LimaCharlie as well. I think this is another really important step and a good concept of bi-directionality. This is not just, all right, let me click a button to quarantine a system. First off, that might be the response action that you might want to take, which is totally okay. If the thing that you're looking to do is you're looking to quarantine and just block systems from doing anything further, then you certainly can. And that's a really easy button to push. So with our bi-directional capabilities, we can just say, cool, do that with any platform you want. As long as it has a quarantine command or something I can issue to that particular sensor or to the platform, we're good to go. Lock it down. But what bi-directionality really allows you to do is it really allows you to expand and say, well, if I were to take my IR playbook and build it into a detection and response rule, meaning I don't want my humans to follow every step of the playbook. I want to automate as much of that as I can so my humans can deal with the parts where they're needed, such as validating alerts or validating response actions that were taken. I'm going to let the platform do the work, but how granular do I want to be with that? And I'll go back to my previous example. I might want to take the source of telemetry and say, if it's a host, for example, I might want to say, is it a domain controller? Is it an external facing server? Is it a user laptop? Is it an intern's workstation that gets hoteled in 10 times a day? And I'm nothing against interns, just looking for different layers of system prevalence here. That's going to be a deciding factor. It has to be a deciding factor because that's going to impact the severity with which I treat the alert. It's really tough if we try to shoehorn all of this into single button click security. So if I have an action which simply says, hey, if an alert fires and it's a high or a critical, quarantine, otherwise notify. Not really the best approach. I want to be able to programmatically say, if this thing happens, and if it's a domain controller, do this tree. If it's an external facing web server, do this tree. If it's a intern's hoteling workstation, do this tree. That's what we allow you to do with bidirectionality, is we allow you to take that thought process, that playbook approach, and apply it to any source that's out there. And as I mentioned, you can also use it to bridge and gap sources. So for example, we talked about earlier, seeing a malicious file execute, issuing a quarantine command against that host or killing that process tree, and simultaneously going over to my email platform and saying, hey, how did this thing get here? Do you have it as an attachment? Where was it found? Now, is that going to answer all of our questions? No. But this is where I need the humans to come in. I need the humans to come in and examine that process execution tree and say, oh, it actually came out of an ISO file that was found that the user received. They opened it, it launched the docx, so on and so forth. But folks, when it comes to concepts like bidirectionality and automation, examining how the docx got on the system, that's one of the things I want the humans to be able to look into, because they've got the intuitiveness to know, the intuition to know, that's where it's at. I want the machine to take care of all the stuff, which is, again, quarantining, blocking, creating different types of security rules. That's what bidirectionality is meant to do. Now, let me show you a couple of examples of bidirectionality in practice. And I'm going to lean on our trusty, really, really useful documentation here. We're going to get rid of this on this side. I'm going to hop over to the documentation for the bidirectionality extension known as Cloud CLI. Now, this is publicly available. Anyone can go and utilize this and turn it on. And as of the recording of this webinar, and I know this list is going to change, so at a point in time, this will be different. But as of the recording of this webinar, we currently have support for 1Password, AWS, Azure, DigitalOcean, GitHub, Google Cloud, Microsoft 365 or O365, Okta, StrongDM, Sublime, and Tailscale. These are just the ones that we've built out for now. If there is a platform you want to see in here, let me know. Hit me up in one of the socials, and I can promise you, only because I'm also working on them, I know of at least 3 other very, very popular EDR or security platforms that are in the works here as well. It's a very quick turnaround for us to turn these around. It's an extension that's available in the marketplace. Anybody can go and turn it on and enable it. And if I simply hop down here, this is exactly what it looks like. We're going to look at this one in just a second here, but that is the Cloud CLI extension if you want to run commands directly from LimaCharlie. Let's not get there yet. Let's take a look at some of the different options and capabilities here. So for each one that we've got built out, we also have sample detection and response rules built out for them as well. So let's take a look at AWS. This one's very straightforward. This utilizes AWS's CLI, the command line interface binary, to issue commands against a particular tenant. Well, you might say, hold on, Matt, or how do I go about specifying all of these different commands and setting this up? This is one of the best parts. We utilize the credential hive that's built into LimaCharlie to store those secrets for you. So I've actually got a detection and response rule here. I'm not throwing plain text credentials or certificates or base 64 encoded data inside of here. I'm actually storing it inside of the secrets hive of LimaCharlie and then referencing it inside the detection and response rule. But this right here, folks, is a detection and response rule. This would be the response portion that you would put, and this would simply go, and I'm reading through kind of the description here. This would stop corresponding EC2 instances within AWS from a particular detection that was fired. The way the response rule gets put together is we are running the Cloud CLI, we're making a request to AWS, and the command tokens is going to literally be a step-by-step of the command parameters that you would provide if you were sitting on the command line. Now for AWS, there's obviously a few different parameters. We need to include things like the region that we're in. The credentials that are going to get passed through are going to be pulled from the hive. We would name that something like, AWS CLI secret. But the important part is this little spot right here where I'm highlighting the event.instance ID. This is pulling directly from the telemetry that would have come in. And it's pulling the instance ID or IDs, sending that data point back to the CLI command request, and then instructing AWS, hey, please stop these particular instances. This is a really, really good starting point and a way to visualize, well, how could I use this thing? Take any particular interchangeable part of an AWS infrastructure, for example, EC2 instances, S3 buckets, whatever it might be, and say, wait, if there's a thing that happens against that particular endpoint or that data source, I want to take a corrective action. That's what this command is designed to do, or that's what this type of response action. For every single platform we've got listed, we also have sample detection and response rules. A huge shout out to Whitney over on the LimaCharlie team who helped pull a lot of these together. But it just starts to show you an example of things that you might want to do in responsive actions. So here's another one. This pulls on M365 or Office 365 that allows you to actually issue a command back that says disable a particular account given a particular user ID. Again, we're going to be pulling from the telemetry, from the event that was generated, and then passing that user ID through to the command so that way we can have that seamless transition. Now, depending on how your organization is set up, if you've got usable SIDs, or I shouldn't say usable, I should say interchangeable SIDs, which allow me to actually map maybe from inboxes to Active Directory to other types of cloud or databases or other types of providers such as Entra ID, I can actually use that field to issue commands against other platforms as well. The other thing I would encourage folks to remember is don't forget where you have that kind of platform-based approach. You might have usable tokens that allow you to issue commands and say, not only do I want to disable an account, I also want to maybe lock an email up or limit SharePoint access or do one of those other kind of, multi-platform style approaches. I want to take a quick look at the Cloud CLI and the extension in the LimaCharlie web app. If you go and you want to enable the extension, it's in the marketplace under extensions and it's EXT Cloud CLI. We have some sample rules dropped in here as well, but it would be a really quick subscribe for your particular organization. Once it is subscribed, and it takes a number of seconds to get there, you will then, within your extensions options, have the Cloud CLI extension. And that's what I've got listed here. This is the same screenshot that we saw over in the documentation back here in Cloud CLI. Scrolling down, there we go. I want to talk about some of the key points of this particular setup, this particular UI right here. First off, up until this point, you've heard me talk about the Cloud CLI or bi-directionality as part of a response rule. There is also a feature or a capability where you might want to run ad hoc commands. Now you might say, well, Matt, why would I come into LimaCharlie to run an ad hoc command against my cloud provider when I could just do it from the command line? And I would say, because we've already got the environment set up for you. If you're programmatically issuing CLI commands, your credentials, potentially your configuration, all of the different things you need are built here in the platform already in the secrets hive or in the secrets manager. You could just simply reference a particular hive and say, I want to run an AWS thing, and we're done. We're on our way. But what this Cloud CLI extension lets you do here is it lets you issue commands directly against a particular platform. And all the ones that we've got support for are listed in here as well. It allows you to run commands from an ad hoc perspective from the UI. The other nice thing is because it's an extension within our brand new extension framework that we have built out, there is also an adapter that gets created for this particular extension. Let me clarify. Every time you enable an extension in LimaCharlie, be it the Cloud CLI or one of the other many features we have, an adapter or a sensor is created as a feedback loop for that particular sensor, for that particular extension, that feature that you've enabled. So if I were to go enable Atomic Red Team or Velociraptor or one of the other extensions, I would get the exact same thing. What this adapter does is it gives you a timeline-based approach, meaning all of the events being issued and sent from an extension or received by the extension are also captured inside of my timeline. So for example, and again, I'll pull up on a really quick and easy one right here. This was the testing of running a particular command against the Azure command line tool to simply enumerate VMs. Now note, this particular command in itself, the credentials are not provided in this command, which means if I have this adapter up, I'm not exposing credentials via some sort of leakage or some sort of arbitrary event. That secrecy is maintained all the way through. And if I had a response to this particular command, that would be captured inside of here as well. Now, if I'm issuing ad hoc commands and I'm looking to test or see what the response is, I'm going to come over here to this adapter to see what events were issued and what commands came back. But if I talk about doing things in a programmatic fashion, I want to utilize this output to generate some subsequent or further events from happening. That's exactly what can happen. So not only does the enabling of the Cloud CLI extension turn on the Cloud CLI adapter, the events from the Cloud CLI adapter are themselves observable. So I can write a subsequent detection and response rule that says, hey, if you see an event from the Cloud CLI adapter that contains a list of VMs, which is the ultimate action that we want, I want you to take that output or that list and send it to my SOC. That's the alert I want them examining. Let me bring back in our case study from a little bit earlier. I'm going to make myself smaller and off to the side, and I'm going to scroll up to our case study. This was case study number 2. This is where we saw that docx file come in, and we went and headed over to, all right, perfect. We're going to head back over to the analysis of this case study here. This is where I issued commands to both Sublime and Defender. One of them was to quarantine. Another one was to say, hey, search across file history to see if this has been inside of an email. Both of the events of the commands being issued and the responses from them are going to be captured in that adapter that I talked about just a moment ago. The nice thing is, because they themselves are observable, I could either combine those and send one ticket off to the SOC that says, hey, this particular detection was found, and here's the corrective actions, and here's the output from those corrective actions. Or I could issue them separately. I could have my quarantine messages go into one queue, and I can have my email detections go into another, because quite frankly, one of them is going to involve a little more human interaction. Another one might not. I might also go a step further, and this is where I get bidirectionality on bidirectionality. I don't have this one drawn up, but let's just hypothetically walk through this for a second. Let's say that I issued that query over to my Sublime platform, and it came back and said, oh yeah, I've got 10 messages that have this attachment. You might want to say, all right, Sublime, I'm going to need you to do something against these 10 messages. Or I might want to take that command, send that over to my email provider, Google Workspace, Office 365, or M365, whatever it is, and say quarantine or delete these emails. When you get to a programmatic approach towards interacting between security telemetry sources, and you're interacting with any source and picking and choosing and saying, how do I want to link these things together? Folks, you've hit the real true capability of bidirectionality, which is I want to have any data source be able to talk to any data source, and I want to be able to issue commands against those particular sources. We're getting to a point where we've got so many different applications spread across each other, so many different capabilities, so many different features, but there's always these common links between them, often found in the form of identity or SSOs or some other sort of linkage, such as maybe APIs that are bringing applications together. But a lot of times there is a common root that I can use to issue commands across them. When you make every single telemetry source observable, like we do here in LimaCharlie, I can pull any data point from any telemetry source and use bidirectionality to issue commands back against any other source or the original source that I want. Not to get too nebulous, not to get too confusing. What bidirectionality is meant to do is meant to say, what is the next step in your data flow? What is the next step in your workbook, in your playbook? What is the next step in your security response action? You know what? I don't want next step. I want the next 10. What are the next 10 steps? If a detection fires that tells you a malicious thing or a suspicious thing has happened, what are the next 10 steps that your SOC analysts go through? How many of those steps involve another platform? And how many of those steps can be automated? And if I can take away 3, 4 of those steps, automate them at wire speed and make them programmatic, make them easily manageable with detection as code, protect my credentials inside of a secret hive so I'm not leaking anything out to any adversaries, and I can let LimaCharlie sit in the middle of making all that happen, I've just reduced my SOC analyst workload by 30, 40, 50% freeing them up to do the parts that I can't automate. But then also stepping back and saying the other thing that we just got back was time. Whether you measure in minutes or seconds or hours or days, getting an alert that a malicious email has come through or that an inbox has been compromised, the adversary still has the advantage. It's not until someone processes that alert and actually goes and does corrective action that you take time back. If I had to leave you with one parting thought today, it's that what bidirectionality actually does is it gives you time back. It gives you time back and says we can do things faster. We can interact with different platforms. We can make this easier. With that said, everyone, I'm Matt. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. This was meant to be a good overview of how bidirectionality can not only be an impactful change for the LimaCharlie platform, but also for your security team that might be utilizing us for all sorts of automated approaches. If you want to, please hit me up in either LinkedIn or check me out on the LimaCharlie community Slack. That's slack.limacharlie.io. Would love to connect with anyone and everyone there. Always looking for feedback, always looking for, hey, I want to see this tool or this thing built out. Can you help me get there? Or how can we go about making that happen? All right, everyone. With that said, thank you so much for joining me today. And hopefully I'll talk to you soon.